Welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Galloway from Lafayette PD in Indiana, 28 years in law enforcement. Really looking forward to this conversation. Physical fitness, mental wellness is all something that he's been prioritizing within his organization. So welcome to the show, Chief Galloway.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. So I kind of, alluded to this in the intro, but you implemented a physical fitness policy within the organization over 20 years ago. Can you give us a little bit of background on how that got started?
Sure. Actually, it was Chief Roush, and give credit where it's due. Chief Roush, 20 years ago, implemented a policy where every officer has to go get a physical from a doctor and turn that in every year. And that's critical because that's blood work, that's catching things early. So just that simple step alone has been, I think, instrumental in keeping our officers healthy. And officers, as you have interviewed a lot of people, they don't have a long lifespan after they retire. So I think the average is 58, 57, and that's way too low. So just by Chief Roush getting that implemented and continuing that on, a policy of making sure guys are at least seeing a doctor once a year to catch something early or just get eyes on, has really been a small thing, but it's been, I think dividends have been paid by that.
Yeah. Well, he was really ahead of his time thinking that way. I've had quite a few conversations recently, and I'm interested to hear your perspective because you've obviously been in it and, boots on the ground for that long. But the conversation was, if you would have brought this up 20 years ago, there would have been big pushback and it never would have been successful. But it sounds to me like this is something that you guys did implement 20 years ago, and it's still something that's being prioritized today. So what was your experience with, putting something out there that was really new and maybe unheard of at the time? Did you get a lot of pushback, or were people really receptive to it?
A mixed bag. I wasn't the chief then, but I think a lot of officers looked at it like it wasn't important. They didn't want to do it. It was kind of just another thing to do during the day, and weren't necessarily interested in it. And if you can think about what I've seen in law enforcement, to kind of piggyback on that mentality, is there used to be a lot of people who would smoke and they would go out to drink after their shift and those kind of things. And I'm not saying anything bad about those things, but that just doesn't happen anymore in law enforcement. We see a lot more people caring about what they eat, going to the gym, getting a physical every year is nothing. Whereas 20 years ago, yeah, you're right. If people pushed back against that, they didn't want to go do it. They didn't see the value in it, but keeping those things on task has been beneficial.
Yeah, I think, the first step is always the hardest. Change can be really challenging. It can be scary, and maybe people don't see the benefits within themselves initially. But over time, you start to see kind of that ROI, right? The return on investment. I think we can look at that in two different ways. You can look at that organizationally, and I'm interested to hear, what the impact has been for you guys, but you can look at that organizationally. Is this extending careers? Is it preventing some major health things from happening in the future? Maybe you're able to identify some of these health risks early on, whereas before it was all reactive versus proactive. And then as an individual, we all have had moments in our lives where, maybe we didn't see the value in something, but over time, we're happy that we did something. And I'll put this in a really, really simple example. How many of us want to go to the dentist? I go twice a year, which people tell me that that's abnormal. Some people go once a year, but for me, I'm very diligent, twice a year. Right. And maybe when I was younger, I didn't see the benefit of that, but it was just something that I did. And now that I'm older, I'm like, wow, I'm so happy that I did that, and I was proactive in taking care of myself and, making sure that everything looks good. And I think that we have to sometimes just put things into action and make it a habit, even if we don't know what the long-term benefit is, just knowing that it is going to be good for us.
Yeah, I'd agree. And going to the dentist is critical. I mean, it's a kind of a one-off that you've mentioned, but yeah, you go twice a year. If you don't go, you get a bunch of cavities when you end up going eventually and have problems. So that's the way I think the physicals went for the officers, was initially, why do I need to go do this? I feel fine. We never did it before. And then they are private. So what you have to turn in is not your physical. It just shows a record that you went. So as the department doesn't know if you had a diagnosis or what your cholesterol is, but I think the officers, and I know that there are officers that took those physicals and found something early that they're being able to then remedy or get a handle on before it got too bad.
Yeah. And then you guys also took it a step further, and you said that physical fitness is something that is really prioritized within the organization too, and that it's not optional. It's something that is expected. Can you talk a little bit about, kind of the evolution? So starting 20 years ago with, these physical checks and blood work and making sure everybody's good, and now kind of transitioning into the physical fitness side of things.
Yep. And I credit our mayor for that. He's a progressive type mayor looking for, quite honestly, lowering insurance. And the way that was approached is to get people in shape across the city. So I do give credit where it's due. Our chief before me his name was Pat Flannelly, and really made really good headways into providing a gym for the police department. It's a functional fitness gym, and really eyes on having officers move, and not just the physical, but then a step further and making sure officers were going to the gym, staying in shape. Nothing was mandated as far as your job depended on it. I think that might be something in the future that happens with law enforcement as a industry, maybe from the academies. But for us, it was just more of a cultural shift. Like this is what's important, is that you are in shape, you're taking care of yourself, you're getting physicals and doing blood work. And the physical fit, the gym was instrumental. There was no excuses at that point. Hey, there's a gym up there. It's got everything you need. And it took the culture of years to see people doing that. And when you hired people in, the expectation was to stay in shape. And this is what the leaders look like, including the chiefs down, are physically fit, and it matters to them. It matters to all of us. So when we do bring on new officers, they have part of their onboarding is doing training in the mornings. They go in with their field training officers, and they do physical fitness bouts.
Yeah. I love that you said that it has taken time to get where you are.
Taken some time. There's still ways to go, but not everybody's in the gym. But if you go in the gym at 6:37 in the morning, it's banging. There's loud music and people are working hard, and that's what I love to see.
Yeah. And I think that we have to remind ourselves of that because, I've had conversations about wellness. Obviously, I've had a lot of conversations about wellness, but I think that so often it's like this instant gratification that you think if you implement something that in a month or in 6 months or in a year, the entire organization is going to be on board and consistently doing these things. And of course, in a perfect world, that's what we hope for, right? We want participation, we want engagement, we want buy-in, we want people prioritizing themselves, and willing to take action when it comes to their own health and wellness. But I agree with you. I think it's a long journey, and there's never really a destination, but knowing that these things take time and building that culture and building those habits and that participation, it might take a couple of years, before the entire organization, or the majority, I wouldn't say the entire, but the majority of the organization is on board. But the other thing that I thought was worth circling back to was you said that you as a leadership team model the behavior that you expect. Can you talk a little bit more about that? How you were able to get your leadership team on board, and what are some of those things that you guys do to model that behavior and show everyone that it's not just something that you guys are talking about as a priority, it's something that you are showing through action as a priority?
I think you hit the nail on the head, leadership by example. So, again, there's no mandate of how many push-ups you have to do or sit-ups or those kind of things. But a lot of the command staff, a lot of the officers that are field training officers, and anybody that's in that kind of a role does know that it's important to be in shape, because you have to catch bad guys and you want to stay alive for as long as you can and live the best life you can, especially in this industry where you're up all night and your hormones are thrown off and all the things that cops deal with. Back injuries, shoulder injuries. The best remedy for that is being in shape, and it's participating in those kind of activities in the gyms or whatever you do, golf, pickleball. I don't try to make people do any certain type of workout. They don't have to go to the gym, but I like people to be moving, doing something, because ultimately it'll matter. And as far as implementing, and it's leadership by example, I'll hit on that. And a lot of the command staff is in the gym in the mornings. I like people seeing me in there doing it too, struggling with kettlebells or whatever else it is. I mean, I think that says a lot if the leadership is doing those things, and it's important to them too. I think there's a little bit of alarm bell goes off or light bulb goes off that it must be important if these people are doing this too. And our guys are great. They are strong. They're in shape. They're good. We have really good officers.
Yeah, I love that. And, I think it also tells people, because I think it does a couple of things. One, I think it's important for leadership to be reinvesting into themselves, right? We know that in order for you to, give the best service to your team, you have to be good, right? And so same thing with your team. In order for them to be able to go out in the community and give the best service to the community, they have to be good physically, mentally. So for you as a leadership team to recognize, hey, we also need to take care of ourselves, which I found through a lot of different conversations that leadership usually takes care of themselves last. So for you to be like, no, I'm going to prioritize myself too, and then show people that it's important for them to also, do that for themselves. But I think the other thing is that we know as a leadership team, you guys are really busy, super busy, right? You have a lot going on, and you have families, you have other responsibilities. And the biggest pushback that I hear all the time is that I don't have time. So for them to come in and see Chief in there at 6 o'clock in the morning being like, hey, I get it. I'm busy too. I got my own personal life too, but I'm still going to show up for you guys, and I'm going to show up for myself, and I'm going to find the time because it's a priority. I think that's the message that you're showing.
Yeah, I think time management is one thing that I've been able to do pretty well during my life is be able to handle time management with scheduling. So it sounds ridiculous, but my workouts are on a calendar. So this is when I have to do it, and I always fit it in. It's a priority. And going back to something you said about leadership, I think police officers, whether they're a brand new officer or the chief of police, are the leaders of whatever call they go to, because somebody's called us. And I think if you look good, you have a sharp uniform, you look like you can take care of business, you are far less likely to get into foot pursuit. That's been my experience. If you look like and you show up with good command and good scene control, you can avoid a lot of those problems before you even get into the altercation or the foot chase where you tear a muscle or Achilles or something like that. So that's another reason why I think it's good to get that on the front end and be doing those things, because you get a lot of fewer injuries, and just you look that part when I think the public expects that you look like you're going to take care of business when you show up on a call.
I had someone one time say that being fit is the first line of de-escalation.
Yeah, a uniform is technically the first line of use of force is a police uniform. And then, of course, yeah, like you said, if you're able to, somebody can size you up immediately. Cops size people up immediately. They do the same thing. Bad guys do the same thing. And if you look the part, I think they're less likely to fight you.
Yeah, they're like, I'm not messing with that guy.
Yeah, they're going to catch me. Yeah.
Yeah, versus like, I can outrun that guy. Yeah.
Yes.
I get it. I don't think that it's ridiculous to put on your calendar. I actually have shared this a few times. That is my strategy. And that is how I've been successful too. And I will scream this from the rooftops because I think that it's really effective. And maybe it's not always a perfect system. Maybe there's times where you have something where you have to go to a school event, or, maybe you're sick or whatever, but it works 99% of the time, which is pretty good, metrics there. But I do the same thing. But the way that I view it is when I set a calendar for myself and say, okay, these are my non-negotiable times that I'm going to go and work out or do whatever, wellness activity it is that you're going to do. I position this as this podcast, for example. Unless there's an emergency, unless I'm super sick, I am not canceling this podcast. I made a commitment to you. I value your time, and I want to make sure that I show up. I have to be willing to do the same thing for myself. right? So when I make that calendar invite and I have it consistently, I have my days that I do things at certain times. I show up for myself in the same way. I'm not going to cancel on myself. I'm not going to show up late. I'm going to make sure that I show up because I value myself and I value my time. And I think that we have to treat ourselves like we would treat others, and you wouldn't miss a meeting with anyone else. So why are you missing these meetings with yourself? So that has been something really effective for me too. So I'm glad that you brought that up because I don't find that to be silly at all. I find it to be highly effective.
Yeah. And I feel guilty if I miss that, right? I feel guilty if I miss a meeting with somebody. I feel guilty if I don't go to the gym.
It
puts me in a bad humor if I'm not at the gym.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think we can learn from those things too. I have like internally, like in my head, like cussed my way through a workout because it's hard, or maybe I don't want to be there or whatever, but I've never left a workout feeling worse than when I walked in.
No.
But I have certainly felt worse missing before. And so I think we have to learn from those and realize, okay, when I do miss these things, I don't feel as good. I feel like I've let myself down. And then how can we do better next time and just make sure that we show up for ourselves? And I also tell people, if you are not someone who is going to hold yourself accountable, because everyone has different personalities, can you find someone who can hold you accountable? So, maybe it's a workout buddy, an accountability partner. Maybe it's a personal trainer that you pay to hold you accountable.
Yeah.
And, everyone makes enough money in this profession to be able to work out with a personal trainer, even a group setting. Or maybe it's a HIIT class or a Pilates studio or whatever that is, where you're paying for that class. And if you don't go, you lose your $20 and you don't want to lose your $20, So I think that if you are not good at holding yourself accountable and creating that, dedication and consistency, how can you find those people or those processes that are going to hold you accountable?
Yeah, peer pressure, I think, is important. That's why I think our culture has changed since the policy of the physical to Chief Lanley putting in the gym and making that a priority. I think people do look at each other and they know if they work out and they know if they're given that effort, and it's expected. Again, there's nothing that holds your job. Nobody's getting fired for that or reprimanded or anything else, but it is something that I think we've taken very seriously, and I'm proud of that.
Yeah. Would you agree with the statement that law enforcement officers are professional tactical athletes?
Yeah, and there's a lot of programming, physical fitness programming for that. A lot of the websites or the Train Heroic or a lot of the sites have dedicated towards that type of training. Yes.
Yeah.
And I've done some of that, but yeah, I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah, I find it really interesting because I think it goes back to culture, and getting people motivated. And not every agency is like yours, where they've had years and years and years of this culture building, and understanding the importance. There's a lot of agencies who are kind of still in infancy stages, but I did a presentation with a room full of chiefs, and I asked this question: how many of you would agree with that statement? And everyone raised their hand. There wasn't one person in that room that did not raise their hand. Then I did a briefing for another organization. I actually did two briefings for two different organizations. And I asked the officers, how many of you would agree with this statement? And no one raised their hand. And I think there's a disconnect, right? If leadership is saying we understand that it's important for our people to perform at a really high physical and mental level. Their job requires a level of athleticism and fitness in order to be successful. But then we ask the officers, do you agree with that? And they're like, no. How do we bridge that gap so that, they understand the importance and they understand that it is really imperative that they can perform physically. And, if you look at any training for professional athletes, they're focusing on physical fitness, but they're focusing, you mentioned this earlier, on injury prevention. They're focusing on sleep and recovery. They're focusing on nutrition. There's a lot of different things that they're focusing on to make sure that their players, which are their most valuable asset, and I would argue that your employees within the organization are your most valuable asset, have longevity and quality of life. And so how do we relay that message, to everyone else when, formal leadership agrees, but everyone else is like, I don't know. I don't see myself that way.
Yeah, I think a lot of officers are in the moment. They're 12-hour shifts. It's tough sleep. A lot of young officers have kids, so they're living life day to day. And we're at a stage in our career where we look back. And fortunately, I made habits early. So even when I was in college, this was my jam, was to go to the gym. So if that's not been your lifestyle, it's hard to make that jump and that change, because this is a job that's a day to day. A lot of skills that we have are perishable. So everybody goes to the academy, they're good at ground fighting, and they're good at shooting, and they're good at driving, and they're doing their physical fitness. As time goes on, you got to do shifts, and life happens, and it's hard to get back in doing those things unless you make time for it yourself, because we're not paying you to go work out. We're not paying you to go do extra DTs. We're not paying you to go drive any courses. So that's kind of the mindset people get in. If I'm not getting paid for this, then I'm not going to go do it. It has to be the officer thinking, I got to do this for myself for the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's also important for them to identify why it's important for them to do it for themselves for the future. We've all been there where we're in the trenches, right? And like, we can't see the clearing from the trees, right? Yeah. We're like, wow, we're just in it. And it is hard to zoom out and have a bigger picture. And I agree that time and experience, you start to have kind of that 2020 of like, oh, I get it now. And my hope is that through these conversations and, other people sharing their experience and like kind of a, hey, learn from me, kid mentality, that people will start to understand that. But I also think it's important for you to always connect with your why. And I think the why, or the lens in which you see your why, can change, throughout different periods of your life. You mentioned that earlier of, some people have kids and, some people don't. So before having kids, your why might not be your kids, but once you have your kids, that is your 100% why of doing these things, And so I think the older, I'll put this in quotes, the older generation can share their experiences, but then also encourage that younger generation to constantly connect with why it's important for them to be physically and mentally well. I think that will help to drive, I hate to say motivation, but maybe more of those consistent habits.
Yeah, peer pressure is definitely is a critical thing that I think we have here. Peer pressure is important. It's not necessarily negative. It sounds like a negative thing, but it's not sometimes.
That's actually a really interesting perspective. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because I do think that when we say peer pressure, we do think of it automatically as negative. But I think you're right. It could be a positive peer pressure where people are like, wow, like I don't want to be the one person that's not fit when everyone else is fit. Like, and that could be something really positive. So I appreciate that perspective. I think that it's important for us to be able to look at things a little bit differently. And I think I've been guilty of that, of being like peer pressure is bad, but it can be really positive. I like that.
One thing on that is in law enforcement, really, since, kind of the George Floyd incident and some of those things, there is the expectation that officers are policing themselves. I think it goes along the peer pressure, is that if you're on a scene and somebody's using force in an appropriate way, there is that pressure to make sure that you get that officer in line. And the same thing could be said for fitness.
Yeah, well, and I think
that goes hand in hand.
And I think it goes back to also the importance of creating a positive culture where the peer pressure is positive, because we know that the reverse can be true, right? If the culture isn't healthy, then maybe they don't have the same accountability for doing the right things. Yeah. We mentioned earlier two things. So the physical part of it, but then also the mental piece of it. I know that you guys are really focusing on kind of what's next and, building out the mental side of your programming. Can you give us a little bit of insight on that?
Yeah. So actually, May is Strike Out Mental Health Month. It's Strike Out the Stigma Month. So we have recently brought on board the city an EAP provider, employee assistance provider. And quite honestly, it's truly trying to break down that barrier of making sure people know that they can go to that. It's private. Your brain is just as important as your body. And in a job like this, you got to be tough. You got to be thick-skinned. That never's going to go away. But When I was 28 years ago, when you went to your first death scene, after you're done with it, you went out to eat. You didn't talk about it. You didn't talk about what you saw. You didn't talk about what happened there. And young kids today, 22, 23-year-old officers, there's a different way of approach to that. So that's why we do offer that. We make sure that it's private, it's paid for by the city. And I think we do have a lot of officers taking advantage of that. They go through problems of this job is a grind when it comes to relationships, with marriages, with drug and alcohol abuse. So that needs to be part of the equation, because you want to keep officers as long as you can, as healthy as you can. That means you got to keep their brains functioning and be able to handle the day ins and day outs, because you see bad things. I don't care if you live in Indiana or California or you're a Chicago cop or a small town, you are going to see bad things. And you don't know that going into it until you actually experience it.
I heard a quote one time that I really liked, and it said the most important training is between your ears.
Yeah.
And I think that we have neglected that. I think that I think physical is tangible, right? So like if you see a cut on your arm, or if you have an injury, you said earlier, maybe you like tear something or whatever, like you can feel that, you can see that. It's very tangible. I think people can understand that. The mental side of things can be more difficult because you don't see it with your eyes, or maybe you don't feel a physical pain. But I do believe that what you said is true, that the physical and the mental are equally as important. I would argue that mental is even more important, to be able to make sure that we're proactive. And you said it's inevitable. You're always going to see things in your profession. It's not if, it's when, and it's how severe. And so how can we be proactive with making sure that you have the resources and the mental training in place so that you're better prepared for when those things happen?
And there was a stat that there's only 4% of the population that's capable of doing these types of jobs, military, fire, these high stress, high impact jobs. It's a very few amount of people that can do it. And to survive that it takes even out a more percentage. So there's not many people that can do this job in the first place. So you have to take care of the people that can. And the reason that people can't do it is because they don't have those skills that they're even born with. They don't have that mental toughness and even the ability to contemplate doing this tough job. And it's not woe is me, because I love this job and I've loved every part of it, but it has been a front row view of life that you would never imagine that thing. I couldn't tell stories or but your viewers can, that are cops. They know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, there's things that happen in a police department in any city that is crazy, and you can't prepare for that. You're kind of born into it, that you can handle the stress and these things that happen to you.
Yeah. And I am not one of those 4%. So my hat's off to you. I do think that, and I've said this before, I think that you guys have the hardest job out of any job in the country.
It's impossible. It's an impossible job. I heard Joe Rogan say that one time. There's no way. This job is impossible. Even if you win by taking somebody to jail, you lose because that person's in jail. I mean, that you've ruined their life. So, but I love it. It's a great profession, and it's an impossible job.
Yeah. But I think, to your point, it's how do we protect the protectors in a way? Like, how do we make sure that even in the realities of your career, which are impossible and challenging and traumatic and all the things, but also I'm sure rewarding, and there's, all the things that go along with it. But how do we create that longevity and quality of life so that we can extend your life expectancy outside of the career? And I think you said earlier it was like 56 or...
Yeah, I think it's 57. It might have increased, but that's kind of the age range that people die in this industry. Is 57, 58 years old. That's really only 2 or 3 years after retirement.
I was going to say, and you typically retire when you're, 50 to 55. 52. Yeah. Depending, some people stay, some people are lifers. But that to me is so sad.
Yeah.
It's so sad.
What people do, what I find it helps is somebody has a hobby outside of this. So we teach our guys, have something besides being a cop, because some people bleed blue. They're cops and they're always cops and that's all they do all day. Mm-hmm. Fish or do something game, do something other interesting outside of being a cop, because this isn't going to last forever. and don't neglect relationships, don't neglect other hobbies or things you want to do or enjoyment, because ultimately this is just a job. It is an interesting job, but that's something we do tell people is right away, make sure you have some other hobby to get away from this.
Yeah, I think it's all proactive efforts. And I've made a lot of mistakes. Obviously, I have a different career, but I've made a lot of mistakes where I didn't prioritize myself. I didn't prioritize my own health and wellness. I didn't prioritize my friends, my family, any of it. I sacrificed every piece of me for my career because I thought that was the only way that I was going to be successful. And as you get older, and you start to have that perspective, I think you start to understand that. And someone said this the other day, and it really stuck with me. They said the job doesn't love you as much as you love it. It doesn't love you back in the same way. And I think that that's okay. I think sometimes we struggle, and I've struggled with, because I have left, jobs, I've left careers. And I realized after the fact, careers and jobs that I've poured everything into, I sacrificed everything for. And I, stepped away, and no one reached out. No one seemed to care. And I struggled a lot with that. It was a hit to my ego for sure. But I also struggled because I was like, man, does that mean that what I did wasn't valuable? And the answer to that is no, what you did is absolutely valuable. And two things can be true at one time. And so I think we have to understand that, all of our careers at one point are going to come to an end. And maybe that community that we built isn't going to be the same. And maybe they don't reach out to you in the same way, or you don't feel connected in the same way. But that doesn't mean that what you did wasn't valuable. What you did was absolutely valuable. But do you have a life to go to when it's all done? And so I think that we can be proactive in a lot of ways. I think we can be proactive with our health and our wellness, physically and mentally. And then I think that we can be proactive in building a life that is fulfilling, so that when we do retire one day, you have somewhere to fall back onto. You have a soft landing. You have something that's fulfilling you in other ways. And I had one chief one time tell me that he was afraid to retire because he felt like a stranger in his own home. And to me, that was so sad, because that meant that he had poured everything into the career, and neglected his home life, his family life. And now retirement was something he feared. How can we make retirement something that, when it's over, it's a positive thing? It's like, wow, like I did great work. I can close that door. I'm proud of myself. I love everything that I did. And now I'm excited for the next chapter. And I have 20, 30 years left to live.
That's the goal. I'm 50, almost 52 now, and I'm thinking, how many more years? How many decades do I have left? Right? It starts to shorten, and so you got to make the most of it. You're right, and you want those last years to be kind of good. That's why you train. That's why you do these things to keep your health, so your last years aren't miserable.
Yeah, I think that we have to emphasize quality of life. Like, we can't just talk about longevity. It has to be quality of life, because no one wants to retire and not be able to move or enjoy, the fruits of their labor, or, be able to go on a cruise or run around with your grandkids or whatever it is that your goal is. And again, I think the steps that we take today, and I always tell everyone, it's easier to stay fit than to get fit. Right? Like, we all know that if we let ourselves go, it's harder to get back to where we were. And so that's why I always tell people, in the academy, I'm like, you are in the best shape right now. Hopefully you don't have any injuries yet. They're all young. They're full of spit and vinegar. They're excited. They've gone through their entire academy, just getting beat up, but physically they're in good shape. And I'm like, how can we maintain that? But I always tell everyone, if you didn't maintain that, what can we do today? Not tomorrow. What can we do today to start taking those little steps in the right direction? And little actions over time compound, right? And so it's not too late to start it. And I think people do get overwhelmed where they feel like maybe they've let themselves go too far. But
yeah, I can agree with that.
Start today. Let's
Yep.
go. Giddy up. I did want to ask you, obviously you guys have put a lot of effort into building out a culture that prioritizes wellness. There are a lot of leaders who listen to this podcast and, maybe have tried things that haven't worked, or maybe are in infancy stages and kind of don't know where to start. Could you give any advice to other leaders who are wanting to build a successful program or a culture that, really emphasizes wellness and gets the buy-in for it?
Yeah, and policing is the police officers are skeptical. They're cynical. I mean, that's just the nature of being a cop, because you've been on the street long enough. Everybody's lying to you. Even the good guys are lying to you. So that's all to say that you're going to have detractors. You're going to have people that don't want to do it. You're going to have people, like you said, that have gone down a road so far that that's going to be hard for them to come back. I remember doing some of the testing, or we do like a physical every year, a physical fitness test, and people would walk it. So you're going to have that. You just got to kind of get past it and take the people who are going to be go-getters. They want to be involved, and really embrace, a group of people that can show others and bring others on board, because you're going to have a certain percentage that are just going to be pushing away. So really make sure that you have a good group of people that are going to bring others along with them.
And I'm guessing that the hope is that creates a ripple effect.
Yeah, because it's going to be, you got to be patient. You're going to take some hits. It's going to be people saying this is BS because it's not important to them. You got to try to show them that is important to the community, and that's what we're here to serve. And we got to jump fences, and you got to chase people, and you got to be able to get out of a car and not get hurt. So it is important to everybody to be in shape and be mentally prepared to do this job.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds to me like you're trying to remind them of the why.
Yeah. And we've been lucky. We have good officers here. We do a good job of recruiting and a good job of hiring. And we try to have a good culture. I always say it's culture, not morale, because people talk about morale. I think that's chasing something. Morale's good when you're going on vacation. Morale's bad when you got reports kicked back to you. So it's all about culture and being able to put good days together, and good weeks, and good lengths of time together. So when the bad thing does happen, it's not so detrimental. It's something you can come back from.
Yeah. If you can reflect on your career and all of the efforts that you've made within your organization, what is something that you're most proud of?
As for me, or the whole department, the whole agency?
For you, I mean, looking back either on your career or even just the efforts that you guys have made organizationally, is there something that you're most proud of?
I think I'm proud of our whole city. It's kind of a unique place where it doesn't matter what politics you are, doesn't matter. It just matters that people are making good decisions for the people. And I think this police department particularly does that really, really good. So it's not politically charged. People just want to do the right thing for the right reasons. And I've been lucky that I came here 28 years ago from Purdue, because that's what I've been raised my whole adult life learning and knowing, is that integrity matters. If you're not going to do the right things, you're not going to be welcomed here at the police department. So I think just generally our whole city has that same vibe, that they're doing the right thing matters. Yeah. And that's what I've learned. I've been lucky to have learned and been involved in that for my whole adult life.
I love that. And I think I would be hard pressed to find anyone who doesn't want that. I think everyone wants to work within a community and within a culture where people conduct themselves with honor and integrity and honesty, and help uplift each other, and, really care about each other and support each other, and, want them to be successful. And so, how do we continue to drive those things forward within every organization, which I know is hard. But I love that you shared that, and it's something that you've been able to grow up with, because not everyone has. But to any other leader who's listening, you have the opportunity to model the behavior that you wish to see, and, try to make more of that positive culture moving forward. My final question for you before we wrap for the day is for the younger generation. What words of wisdom would you share with them that, maybe you wish you would have known when you were younger?
I think it comes down to one word, that's humility. As police officers, it's a career where you're supposed to know every answer, and you're supposed to know how to handle every situation. And I think you're better served if you're humble and you ask questions, whether you're a new guy or a chief. I'd go to my new officers and ask them how to do things, because I don't know everything, and it teaches them you don't have to be the expert on every single thing that happens. The public thinks we're supermen, and these are super people, but we make mistakes. And if you can own your mistakes and you can have integrity, you can last a long time in this career.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on here with me and talking about the efforts you guys have made organizationally and sharing your words of wisdom. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.